Yo everyone, welcome to my predictions and breakdown of the entire UFC Fight Night Sandhagen vs Figueiredo fight card. There's actually a few very solid fights on this card and I'm pretty keen to jump into talking about this one. Before we get into the video however, like I always do, let's quickly go back and talk a little bit about how we did on the previous card, which was UFC Fight Night Machado Garry vs Prates, and oh my god guys, this honestly was one of the best cards I've ever watched. I think in overall cards I've seen, and I've watched so many now over the years, it might be in the top 5 or top 10 for sure. You couldn't ask for much more. So many finishes and highlights. I think there was 2 KOs of the year contenders on the card, and it was just finish central overall with no boring fights on the card. Maybe except for Michel Pereira's performance, but that's not even on Abus Magomedov at all. Pereira just didn't look like he even came to fight, unfortunately. Talking about Ian Garry versus Carlos Prates though, I can't believe that Ian Garry did what he did, and he did what he said he would in the press conference. He said he would shut down Prates, he said he would outperform him in this fight, and he really did, at least in the first 3 rounds of the fight. He was shutting down Prates' offense in those early rounds, was up 3 rounds to 0 by the time it got to the 4th round. Insane work, very impressive, but it did feel like Prates just wasn't getting going. I think Ian Garry was able to nullify him a little bit, able to make him a little bit more tentative, but he did seem like he was trying to pace himself a little bit. He was lacking his usual aggressiveness and urgency in this fight. And by the time it got to the 4th and 5th round, he had almost finished Garry, but it was a little too late, honestly, and he needed to get going a lot earlier. Regardless though, it'll be a bit of a learning experience for him, and I'm sure he will bounce back in his next fight. I really hope though, with all the hype surrounding Buckley at the moment, after his fight with Usman, they make the matchup with Ian Garry, if Ian Garry doesn't get the title shot or if Buckley doesn't get the title shot. Overall though guys, on this card, we went very well. We went 11-3 on picks overall. We ended up slightly losing a little bit, maybe like a little bit over half a unit on the card overall in terms of bets. So it wasn't terrible in terms of bets. We did cash quite a few bets, but the biggest bets we had didn't end up cashing, unfortunately. So I'll just show the betting results on the screen here for you guys, and we're looking to create some success going into this card this weekend. I will be posting the full card betting guide video for this card later on this week, so make sure you keep an eye out for that video if you want to know what my personal bets for the card are and what all my betting tips for the card are as well. I also want to talk about the subscribers bet of the week. I want you guys to go into the comment section below and let me know what your favorite bets for this card are, and I will be taking one person's bets to add to the betting guide for this week. This bet may be a specific bet I like, or even the top comment with the most likes on the video. If you think you've got a solid bet in mind, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below, and you may see your comment and bet in the newest betting guide as an addition to the bets. Anyways, guys, to finally jump into the video, I'll be starting with the prelims and working my way all the way to the main event. Timestamps are in the description and the comment section below if you'd like to skip to any fight in particular. We're going to be starting with the first fight of the card, which is Juliana Miller versus Ivana Petrovic. And now, guys, we're starting off with an absolute banger, am I right? Okay, I'm joking, of course. But the reason I'm acting like this a little bit is because, you know, I always put in the effort. I always go back. I watched a lot of fight tape on both of these fighters for this video, just like I do for every single fight and for every single prediction video. And I've come to the conclusion, to put it simply and to put it as nice as I can, both of these girls are not very good. That's putting this as respectfully as I can, because at the end of the day, an MMA fighter should be respected above all else, just for being able to put their health on the line and get inside of the cage. At the end of the day, it's all to entertain us, but sometimes you do have to acknowledge when the skills of the fighters are just so much lower than the ranked fighters of their division. Miller is 3-3, and Petrovic is 7-2, I believe, going into this fight, and that would mean they signed Juliana Miller after winning the Ultimate Fighter as a 2-1 professional into the UFC, and then they immediately put her against Veronica Hardy and Luana Santos, which are both tough fights as well. I don't really know what the UFC is doing with that sort of matchmaking, or if the flyweight division is just not that deep in the UFC, but that seems pretty rough to me. Ivana Petrovic was signed to the UFC as a 7-0 prospect, and lost 2 out of her last 3 fights as of recent inside the UFC. So her losses were to Jamie Lynn Hort and Luana Carolina. And I'll be honest, I'm looking at a couple of things going into this fight specifically. The number one thing I'm looking at is I don't know why Ivana Petrovic deserves to be such a high favorite over Juliana Miller. I can understand it a little bit, but I do think it shouldn't be that high. And the number 2 thing I'm looking at is that Ivana Petrovic has just been she's been more active, and Juliana Miller has been out for almost 2 years. So in the end, if I think about the fighting styles and technique and I take all of those things into account, I do think Ivana Petrovic is the slightly more technical and better fighter of the two. I think although she isn't the greatest on the feet, she has her moments and can pick her shots well sometimes, and that will do her well against a Wilder type fighter in Juliana Miller. Petrovic is also the bigger fighter as well, and she will have the reach advantage in this fight. I could see her controlling this fight somewhat on the feet by landing better shots and then winning the majority of the grappling exchanges, and possibly just winning the fight, maybe 29-28 on the judges' scorecards. I just worry about her low output on the feet. That's where I could see someone like a Juliana Miller having some more success, because she's not afraid to throw, and at the end of the day, the one who does more damage in the fight and will win the fight. This is a close fight, guys. I'm going to go with Ivana Petrovic in this one to get this one done. I'm moving on to Thomas Peterson versus Don'Tale Mayes. And now, guys, maybe I'm just in a bit of a roasting mood, guys, maybe in a bad mood or something, but I just take one look at Thomas Peterson and Don'Tale Mayes, and I'm like, just how are these guys athletes inside the UFC heavyweight division? This is not to say they aren't skilled. This is not talking about their skill level at all, but I just think they both look like a couple of uncles that might share a beer in the park on a Friday afternoon after work. You know what I mean? Like, come on, boys. Was there no chance we could possibly make 205? Like, especially Thomas Peterson. He's 6'1". Fighters that are in 205 are like 6'4", 6'5". Johnny Walker makes 205. You just got to make 205, man. Like, come on, man, please. Anyway, in my honest opinion, if we get back to the fight, if Thomas Peterson has any sort of level of success with his wrestling and is shooting at least 3 to 5 times in this fight, he should win the fight very, very easily, and I think that's why he is a larger favorite going into this fight. I think it should be a relatively close fight, since Peterson tends to favor himself on the feet a little bit, and he does so for a little bit too long in some fights. And I think this happens in the majority of his fights as well. And if he does not secure the takedown multiple times in this fight, I think he will be at a bigger disadvantage against Don'Tale Mayes. And I could see it going similarly to the Jamal Pokes fight that he lost. This is going to be relatively close. I'm going to go with Thomas Peterson in this one, but this is truly a test to see if he can use his wrestling well against a pretty decent opponent. I think Don'Tale Mayes isn't terrible to jump on either, maybe for a prop like a straight KO as well. But to reiterate my point, Thomas Peterson is the pick. Moving on to Gaston Bolanos versus Quang Le. And this is a pretty interesting fight because I can see Quang Le being a decent underdog here. I can see it on the books. I honestly think it should be a pretty close matchup in my opinion, probably closer to 50-50 odds. I do think that Gaston Bolanos has shown a better ability to avoid some danger on the ground, because before I thought if someone had like some decent wrestling, they'd be able to get him to the ground and control him, but I've seen quite a bit of improvement, especially after watching his fight with Cortavius Romius not too long ago, and I do also think that Gaston Bolanos will have the striking edge in this matchup. I think he's the more careful and cautious of the two on the feet. Quang Le does have some solid boxing. He's got some good jabs. He's decently dangerous on the feet. I also think that he might have some solid opportunities to take this fight to the ground as well. He's quite good at getting the back of his opponents and putting the body triangle in, but he just takes way too much damage for my liking, and the leg kicks really seem to do really well against him, and I think Gaston Bolanos will use them quite a bit in this fight. Chris Gutierrez was able to implement them super well against Quang Le, and I just can't unsee that going into this fight. I was thinking about picking Quang Le for a little bit, and if I think about all those things, combined with the fact that he's coming off a pretty brutal KO loss to Xiaolong, I believe, not too long ago, I would like to see how he tackles this challenge in Gaston Bolanos. I will pick Gaston Bolanos in this fight, but I do think the odds should be closer. It's a little bit disrespectful towards Quang Le. So moving on to Marina Rodriguez versus Gillian Robertson. This one's going to be a pretty quick pick because in theory, Gillian Robertson should win this matchup a lot since she's a great grappler, better BJJ practitioner than pure grappler, but she does have some pretty nice takedowns, and Marina Rodriguez has shown a big propensity to struggle against some pretty solid grappling offense, and she has also shown she can be controlled on the ground as well. Marina is solid on the feet, and if she is able to keep this standing, I have no doubt she will be able to beat Gillian Robertson, since Robertson's striking, although it has improved, it's still not great when compared with the top of the division. Gillian Robertson should be able to take her down, though. I believe that should be able to happen. I reckon she controls her on the ground for a good portion of this fight. That's just my opinion. I'm picking Gillian Robertson to get this one done, most likely by decision win. I'm going to say maybe 29-28, unanimous decision. I don't think it will be a split. Moving on to Ryan Loder versus Azamat Bekoev. And this is a very interesting fight. I do think I will be going with Azamat Bekoev ultimately in this matchup, just because of what I've seen from Ryan Loder on the feet in the fights that I've watched. The dude is just way too cautious. He's way too tentative. He doesn't seem very natural on the feet, in my opinion. And his strong suit, of course, and where he wants the fight to be, in the end, is on the ground. And I think he might have the better overall ground game in the matchup against Bekoev. I don't know whose wrestling is going to be the better of the two, but I do think that Ryan Loder should have the advantage in the BJJ department, since he's usually always trying to chain positions when I watch him fight and when he's trying to take someone to the ground initially. This guy absolutely loves getting his opponents in the crucifix position, by the way. I don't know how many fights I watched of his where he was just trying and working to get back to that position to finish the fight. But to stop me from rambling, I do think the wrestling might cancel out in this fight a little bit. I think Bekoev might feel like he has the advantage on the feet, so he might look to keep this fight in the striking department, and I think that would be smart of him, and I think that's most likely where he would get the easiest victory and potentially a KO as well. I think if either guy gets taken down, though, I wouldn't automatically just favor Ryan Loder on the ground just because I believe he's got the better BJJ game. I think I wouldn't favor either guy, I'll be honest, on the ground in bottom position as well, because I watched a lot of Ryan Loder's fights, and the only loss that I watched him have against Troy Green, Troy Green just did some solid work against Ryan Loder when Ryan Loder was just on his back. He was giving him some solid ground and pound, and Azamat Bekoev should just win the fight with his striking in general, and I could see him doing some solid ground and pound himself if he's able to get this fight to the ground with his takedowns. Azamat Bekoev will be the pick here. Moving on to Yana Santos versus Miesha Tate. And man, whenever I see Miesha Tate, it's just a blast from the past, guys. I don't even know why she's still fighting either, especially at almost 39 years of age. You've already been the champion. I don't know what's more there is to do for her. It's insane to me. She's taking on Yana Santos in this fight, formerly known as Yana Kunitskaya. If you guys haven't been able to find some of the previous fights she's been in, it's just due to a different surname. Like, a lot of fighters have switched surnames, especially WMMA fighters. But honestly, I could see the underdog Yana Santos coming away with the victory here in this matchup, and I'll be honest, I could see it happening fairly easily too. I think she's looking pretty decent on the feet. Her strikes are pretty solid. She's got nice kicks. She's relatively strong in some of the grappling exchanges, and she can mix in her own grappling sometimes when she needs to. I watched her reverse positions in the clinch against the cage in her fight with Ketlen Vieira, and I thought that skill is going to be pretty useful in a fight against Miesha Tate. And Miesha's got her ground game, but I don't care what the commentary team will tell you over and over again. Every single time she lands a decent strike on the feet, her striking is not good, guys. It's not good. Her striking defense is even worse, in my opinion. She's always taking a lot of damage in her fights, which is not good for the judges to see, and she mainly only has a good 1-2 with a pretty solid right hand. She actually does have a pretty solid right hand, but that's only really off the front foot. Like, if she's walking forward, marching forward, she looks like she has a good right hand, but she does not land that shot on the back foot, and I think Yana Santos will have her backing up in this fight with her strikes. I think I could see Yana Santos winning 30-27 in this fight, since Miesha Tate's relatively durable and she's hard to finish. I can see her doing pretty well with the striking. That's my prediction. I'm going to go with the underdog in this one. And now we're finally able to move on to the main card and main card opener, which is Jeremy Stephens versus Mason Jones. And this is another fight with an older fighter that probably shouldn't be coming back to the UFC to fight anymore. Like, listen, Jeremy Stephens is a legend, but the dude was on a massive loss streak in the latter end of his career, and it didn't really get too much better for him in his short stint with the PFL. He did very well in BKFC and in boxing in general, but this shit here, guys, it's not boxing, it's mixed martial arts, and Mason Jones is insanely good and insanely underrated. Maybe not obviously underrated because the odds are showing very, very highly of Mason Jones, like he's a very big favorite, but I do assume that he's not well known to a lot of people. I'm pretty certain he got cut from the UFC after his loss to Ludovic Klein, which isn't anything to be ashamed of. Ludovic Klein is an absolute beast. He's on a massive win streak. He's been beating so many top fighters like Ignacio Bahamondes as well, and he also did lose to Mike Davis in his UFC debut, which is just an insane debut opponent to get. And after that fight, he was able to beat David Onama, but he was the heavy favorite going into that fight since Onama took that fight on short notice. I believe it was like a week's notice. You have to be pretty solid to beat David Onama the way he did, guys. He put on a pace over David Onama. He beat him in the striking, beat him in the grappling as well. Both of those were high level for Mason Jones, and now he's on a 4-fight win streak. 3 fights of those were finishes, coming back to the UFC, and I think he puts on a statement and finishes Jeremy Stephens in this fight, either by TKO or submission. I reckon a finish is coming a large majority of the time. Jeremy Stephens has been absolutely ragdolled and destroyed on the ground by so many opponents, especially in the latter half of his career. I'll be surprised if we don't see this fight on the ground in the first round, almost certainly. So look out for the potential bet on this fight, but I need to suss out what prop I would want to pick. Confident picks list edition for Mason Jones. Moving on to Cameron Smotherman versus Serhiy Sidey. And to me, guys, this is an absolute pick'em fight. I reckon it's as close to a 50-50 as you'd think. I might favor the composure and technical striking of the underdog Cameron Smotherman a little bit more than Serhiy Sidey, honestly, in my opinion. I know he did get finished on the Contender Series. I do think that stoppage was a little bit premature and he wasn't completely out of it. Though, in my opinion, as well, I also think he looked pretty solid in almost every single fight that he's been in since, and he's looked pretty solid in all his fights in the past, like, 3 years of fights that I've been watching. The Jake Hadley fight was a big showing for him, since he was such a massive underdog going into that fight, and he was able to pull away with a win there. Even though it was a close fight and there was a point deduction, he still looked really good against a very difficult opponent. I honestly think he can get this one done, maybe either by TKO in a scrap or by a relatively close decision win, winning maybe 29-28 on the judges' scorecards, maybe a split decision. I think he's going to have his hardest rounds in the first and second rounds of the fight with Sidey, but then in the third round, I could see him outstriking him a little bit more comfortably because Sidey is a bit of an early explosive fighter. He can tend to gas out after the first 2 rounds. But this is still a relatively tough pick. I could see Sidey winning. I could see Smotherman winning. Just trying to find a way to weed out a fighter to pick in this fight because it's pretty 50-50 to me. I do think Cameron Smotherman is the slightly better fighter going into this fight, and this matchup isn't the most terrible one for him. So I am going to take the underdog here, guys. Moving on to Montel Jackson versus Daniel Marcos, and now, although I do think Daniel Marcos is a fantastic fighter, he's very solid, he's a dangerous striker, I have really been quite vocal about him arguably losing a couple of his close fights that he's had recently. I thought Yanez could have got the win in his most recent fight with him, and I think back and remember his fight, I think it was with Davey Grant, and I'm pretty sure people were arguing about a robbery in that fight too, and I watched that fight back a little bit for this video, and I thought Davey Grant actually did do the better work in that fight, and although there was more visible damage on Grant in that fight, I still think he probably edged out that win. And Montel has been looking quite decent on the feet overall. He's rangy, he's powerful, he's gotten quite slick in the striking, and people forget, man, that his base is in wrestling, and I think we should see him bust out the wrestling prowess in this fight over Daniel Marcos. I think Daniel Marcos has had a bit of trouble with taller fighters in his career that have pretty solid boxing, not necessarily crazy trouble, but trouble enough to arguably lose very close fights, like in his fights with Davey Grant and Adrian Yanez. I think this fight's going to be relatively close. I could see Montel Jackson winning a close decision victory here in this one. If it does go to split decision, guys, there's no way they can give Daniel Marcos another split decision. There's just no way, guys. Come on. Montel Jackson is the pick, but close one to call. I do think the odds should be a bit closer in this one. I do think Daniel Marcos is a good opportunity as well for those who favor him to get this one done. Moving on to Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Daniel Rodriguez. This is just another 50-50 pick and fight to me as the feature fight on the card. I do think that initially I did want to go with D-Rod, and that was just because I think he's been a little hard done by with some hard matchups, like the one he took against Kelvin Gastelum. That was already a little bit of a tough matchup for him, and he took that fight even though Kelvin missed weight by an insane amount of weight, and it got him to change the weight class from a welterweight to middleweight to fight that fight. And but in saying that, he did receive a good win against Li Jingliang and sort of robbed him there, but that's not his fault. That is the judge's fault for giving him a bad decision there. I think my main reasoning for initially going with D-Rod is because I watched the Carlston Harris fight where Ponzinibbio did get the finish there. And Carlston Harris hits hard, man, don't get me wrong, but his striking technique is so poor. And he clubs down that right hand just like he's pouring, and he rocked Ponzinibbio twice in the first round of that fight, and he had a lot of success throughout that fight before he got finished. And I just think that D-Rod overall is going to be the significantly better striker than Carlston Harris, then Ponzinibbio as well. And he's going to have some solid output. He will be able to pick his shots in some dangerous exchanges. And I think my initial assessment and who I initially was going to go with in D-Rod is the correct choice, because I think he just will do better with his higher output and he will do more damage in this fight. I could even see him countering Ponzi, landing a big right hand that rocks him bad in their fight and finishing him via TKO. Ponzinibbio is a dangerous dude. His pressure is really solid, and if he does decide to use his grappling a little bit more in this fight, I could see him do well against D-Rod, but I am still going to go with my initial gut instinct pick in Daniel D-Rod Rodriguez to get this one done. And it's as an underdog too. I believe it's switched, so D-Rod's the underdog as of the recording of this video. Moving on to the co-main event of the evening, Reinier de Ridder versus Bo Nickal. And I'm seeing so many people out there pretty confidently picking Reinier de Ridder to win. And Reinier de Ridder is a pretty moderate underdog, and these people are just getting in my head, man. A lot of these people just getting in my head. They're making solid points about de Ridder and his style and how Bo Nickal had a terrible performance against Paul Craig, this and that. I'm trying not to get swayed from my initial line of thinking because because I've watched Reinier de Ridder before he made it to the UFC, and I just don't rate Reinier de Ridder very highly. I've said this for a while. Just in regards to top-level UFC talent and in any future matchups he's got at the top of the UFC middleweight division, I just see him getting viciously knocked out or just straight-up dominated by the top-level guys in the division. GM3 gave him way too many problems on the feet for me to favor him in a lot of matchups, and I did pick him to win that fight because I did think he was better than GM3. But I did pick Holland to beat him, and that didn't age very well. But I do think this is a very different matchup, and I don't see Reinier de Ridder, who is relatively not very explosive at the very least. Out of the two fighters here, he's not the explosive one in comparison to Bo Nickal. But I just don't see Reinier de Ridder being able to take down Bo Nickal or blitz him with the stand-up. And if Bo Nickal is any good, or has any chance of doing well at the top of the division at the middleweight division, he should be knocking out de Ridder in this fight. And honestly, I was incredibly disappointed when he was not following up and he wasn't going for more finishing type shots against Paul Craig, since Craig doesn't really have much for anyone on the feet. He wouldn't be a real danger to Bo Nickal, even in the brawl type exchanges, and I could just see Bo Nickal either KOing de Ridder in this fight or potentially having another boring Paul Craig type performance in this one by winning a decision, just doing, you know, like jabbing on the outside and using his speed advantage to like stay out of danger. And it might just be a comfort thing for Bo because at this point he's only like 7 fights into his pro MMA career. But I do hope we see him trust his abilities a bit more because he's actually quite talented. And he's showcased that he's a pretty solid grappler and he's a pretty solid striker. So Bo Nickal will be the pick, guys. But I am curious to see how many people are picking de Ridder to win in the comments. So if you're picking de Ridder, please leave a comment in the comment section below and just like show me your justification. Show me it in the comment section below. I'd like to see what your justification is on the flip side, because since I'm picking Bo Nickal, I would just like to see it just so I can read it. Locking in Bo Nickal to get this one done. We can finally move in to the main event of the card, Cory Sandhagen versus Deiveson Figueiredo. And I'm gonna start this off. I hate seeing this shit, guys. I hate seeing it. Cory Sandhagen is a minus 500 favorite as of the recording time of this video, and I just don't understand what the fuck the odds are and why they are like this. I'm not saying I don't think Cory Sandhagen wins this fight or he just gets demolished in this fight. I actually do think he does win this fight, and spoiler alert, I am going to pick Cory Sandhagen, but the odds are just so bad, and it's starting to get into like the territory of the odds where like you would expect the guy to like finish him within the first few rounds or something, you know? The way I'm really visualizing this fight going for Cory is I expect him to do well on the feet versus Deiveson Figueiredo, especially after more so the first 2 rounds of the fight, and I think that's where he's going to take over. I think this fight goes to decision a lot. I think that Deiveson can tend to lose a bit of explosiveness and output, especially when it goes past like the 2nd or 3rd round. And I think this fight's going to go a little bit more similarly to his Petr Yan fight that he did have not too long ago. And I think this outcome happens the majority of the time. Cory Sandhagen isn't easy to finish, guys. It's hard for me to see Deiveson Figueiredo just sweeping him or taking him down or just straight knocking him out with one punch. But Deiveson is very strong. He hits very hard. He's probably the hardest hitter in the weight class. But like I mentioned, I don't see this fight going to the ground too often with Deiveson Figueiredo just dominating him on the ground. I did watch Cory do very well against Umar in terms of defensive grappling and submission defense, and his overall takedown defense was fantastic. Cory won't be facing the same level of wrestling going into this fight, or the dynamicness or full roundedness of the striking similar to Umar Nurmagomedov, because Umar throws a lot of kicks. The power of Figgy and the boxing of Figgy, it's what's going to give him the most trouble going into this fight. But I do think overall Sandhagen should be able to tackle the challenge, work early, take over by the 3rd round onwards, and win a decision victory here over Deiveson Figueiredo. I'm going to say probably a 48-47 decision, or maybe one judge giving like a 49-46 to Sandhagen. That's my official prediction for this fight, guys, and that wraps up my full card predictions and breakdown for the entire UFC Fight Night Sandhagen vs Figueiredo fight card. And if you guys have any thoughts or any questions for me regarding the card or anything regarding the UFC in general, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to respond to every single comment in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and see you guys next time.